Thank you to the National Australia Bank for inviting me. I think this is the fifth time I've done this, so fairly soon I'll be running out of things to say. Hopefully this will not be the year. One thing, Alan Oster always provides a lot of excellent forecasts, but I'd be a bit frightened, Alan, because so many of your forecasts, as you acknowledge, are very close to those of the Federal Treasury. And one of the conclusions I drew from last night's budget was that the Treasury cannot be trusted. Now, Wayne Swan, when interviewed, says, well, these are the Treasury numbers, we have to go by them, that's all we can do. And without wanting to appear too partisan, I believe in the previous government there was a healthy scepticism of what Treasury used to say. Essentially, Treasury will give the government of the day, in my view, the answer it thinks it wants to hear. As a result, Treasury in bad times will tend to be over-optimistic, and that is what I believe is happening again this year. So I guess my conclusion as looking at the budget, to jump right ahead, is that yes, we know we've got a deficit this year. It was supposed to be a surplus. Wayne Swan acknowledged last night that in fact he reckons there could be 2 to 3 more years of deficits before we get back to surplus, and this assumes that the spending and taxation programs that he institutes will still be in place. And of course there's a little thing called the federal election coming up before that, which might mean that last night's budget really isn't worth the paper it's printed on. But all I would say is this, and Alan Oster I think pointed this out well, Treasury struggles to forecast 1 year out. So forecasting 3 and 4 and even 5 years out I think is a mug's game. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to those numbers. Other things that Wayne Swan said last night, he said the term Asian century at least 7 times. This was interesting because I just read an article in The Age the other day. I'm one of the few people that still reads The Age, and it said that in fact the 21st century could well be the second American century, that the Asian century was actually a bit of a misnomer. All I know is that Wayne Swan kept saying it over and over again. And I suppose by Asian century he's probably hoping that demand for Australia's mineral commodities will continue and that the much lamented mining tax will actually start producing some money. And indeed I noticed in the forward estimates I think the mining tax is supposed to go from collecting a couple of $100 million a year, which is all it's doing right now, to a couple of $1 billion a year. Very small compared to what it was supposed to do. But the problem is if the Asian century does not prove to be correct, that is that China's growth or all of Asia's growth moderates, as indeed the National Australia Bank forecast that it might, I don't know what this is going to do for those same forward estimates. Still, if we say it enough times, maybe we'll believe it. He also said we could look forward to a clean energy future. I think it was 5 times in last night's speech. Now, this is interesting because the price of clean energy has gone down dramatically. As you just heard, in Europe, you can buy a tonne of carbon, I think it is, for $5 for the tonne. Of course, last year we were forecasting that in a couple of years it'd be $29 a tonne. I believe now that the current forecast is $12. Again, note what I said about not really being able to pay too much attention to what Treasury says. They've got no idea. Greg Combay likes to talk about this, and this is the wonderful thing about the carbon price going down, is that we can now purchase our clean energy future at a much cheaper price. There is the slight issue that there's a whole ton of compensation tied to the carbon tax. And when the carbon tax was still, as it is at the moment, at $23 a tonne, all the compensation, all the money has been spent on compensation, I should say, at $23 a tonne. Now the carbon tax is now forecast, or at least the carbon price, to go to half that, to $12 a tonne, and yet it was not clear to me what happens to all that compensation, which I suspect, like a lot of compensation, will remain locked in. So yes, some future increases, some family payments and so forth have been taken out of the budget, but all the compensation that's currently being paid that has not been touched, will the government be able to afford that if the carbon price doesn't even get to $12 a tonne but stays at the European levels or $5 or $6 a tonne? It's a question that no one asked last night, but I think it's one that has to be addressed, because it's not like the carbon tax is just a tax, it is a tax and spend policy. The government has already pre-spent every single dollar trying to pay people off to get the policy through in the first place. But if the carbon price does not go up, then those dollars will have a carbon deficit as a result. Wayne Swan was also very quick to get stuck into European austerity. He said that the failed policies of Europe. Now, just 3 or 4 years ago, he was sort of saying how wonderful European socialism used to be, and I'm being a bit rude there because he didn't use the term socialism, but Europe is clearly on the nose at the moment, and yet we used to take so many of our ideas from Europe, the concept of the welfare state and all that sort of thing. Clearly that's out the window now. And he used another phrase to turn grey into gold. I don't know how many of you watch science fiction movies. There's a great Charlton Heston film from the early 70s called Soylent Green, And for those of you who are a bit younger than me or younger in general, in Soylent Green, the punchline, so I'm about to ruin it for you if you want to get it out on DVD, is that in the future there isn't enough food for everybody. People think they're eating Soylent, but in fact they're eating dead people. They're eating older people who have died and are being turned into food for everybody else. Effectively, we've all become cannibals. I just wonder when Wayne Swan said he wanted to turn grey into gold, if that's what he actually had in mind. Before I started here this morning, I did a short video for the National Australia Bank website, and I was told by the producers that we are not to use the phrase winners and losers. I asked why not. They said, well, it's a bit too Herald Sun. Anyway, so and there's nothing wrong with the Herald Sun. It's still a very popular newspaper. So I'll talk about good and bad, and you can substitute in other words at your own pleasure. So I guess the good things in the budget, and I take a pretty sort of simple view of all this. I don't try and look at real versus, inflation adjusted and all that sort of thing. But look, I do like the NDIS and the Gonski policies. I think they're very well meaning. They're classic Labor policies to do what you can to lift up the disadvantage in society. Of course, the cynic in me always says, well, how are we going to pay for this? We know that the NDIS will be partly paid for by the increase in the Medicare levy. All this was leaked, 2 weeks ago. I don't really have a problem with that. I do have a problem with levies in general, and governments of all persuasions love them because the word levy does not seem to be as universally hated as the word tax. But a levy is a tax. It's just a hypothecated tax. It's a tax where the money goes into a specific bucket rather than all the other taxes which just go into one big bucket. Anyway, Wayne Swan did say last night that the 0.5% increase in the Medicare levy will go into a special account, a separate bucket for the NDIS, and I guess that's a good thing. How the rest of the NDIS is going to be funded is still up for grabs. I mean, the states apparently have some role to play. Other taxes may have to increase. Gonski as well, which is yet to pass through the parliament, and it's not at all certain what the coalition will do if they're elected beyond September 14. I say that because whereas Tony Abbott has said a couple of times he quite likes Gonski, more recently he's been saying he'll only continue with Gonski if all the states sign on. And at the moment, quite a few states, Victoria among them, are still backpedaling a bit on Gonski because, frankly, they don't think they have the money to tip in. I think the Prime Minister's offer is $2 federal dollars for one state dollar. So there's a fair chance that, for all its great merits, Gonski might not actually get up and could disappear from the budget, as could many things. I mean, again, this idea that you can forward commit future governments to things that are done today is rubbish. I mean, anything governments do, future governments can undo. It just depends whether or not they have the political willpower. And so I just have a funny feeling that as good as Gonski is, it probably isn't going to last. As far as the deficit itself goes, $18 billion. I must admit in my black nights when I think about these things, which frankly or fortunately isn't too often, I actually thought the deficit would be up around $30 billion, so I guess it's actually better than expected. That's a good thing. The baby bonus has been axed. It's been replaced by a smaller family tax benefit payment. It's interesting, they actually axed it in precisely 9.5 months. So for those of you who are motivated by the prospect of $5,000 or $3,000, you've got 2 weeks to... I actually use the phrase, I think, to get your socks on or off, because I suppose you should take them off. The Millennium Goals of foreign aid have been slowed. I spoke to the Foreign Minister, Bob Carr, the other day. Gee, he loves to talk, Bob Carr, I can tell you. It's just, whatever you say, it's just bang, and it's like you're back at university and being lectured at by someone who's obviously knows a lot more than what you do. And Bob Carr knows a lot more than most people do about everything. But we're still increasing our foreign aid, in fact, by 10% this year.